All right, shalom, shalom. First and foremost, we want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rekakwadash, giving double honor to the apostles and elders, a great millstone. Shalom to the hopeful elect. Shalom to all the brothers out here laboring in this truth with sincerity. So just coming back with another lesson. This one is going into specifically Levi and Simeon. And before I start the lesson, I just want to say the water to the elders of the Atlanta camp, for showing patience, as well as you brothers, within the camp, because, like it was said, this truth, when you bring it out, it must be brought out boldly, as well as in an edifying manner, and a point well taken. Because Yahweh Shemel Shai is really setting us up, to be soldiers, man, within this truth until that appointed time to actually, be soldiers. But with that being said, we're going to get into the lesson. As we can see the chart, you got Simeon, which is in the Hebrew Shemaiah one, which means affliction heard. And you have Levi, which is lawyer in the Hebrew, and it means join unto me. And so we'll get into the scriptures, to be able to actually break this down. So we'll start at the book of Genesis chapter 49 and verse 1. It says, "And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days." And we're in the last days, right now. The last days started, when our Lord, walked the earth, man, like over 2,000 years ago. So we're in the last of the last days now, and we use this 12 tribes chart, to identify, who the sons of Jacob would be in the last days. So it says, "Gather yourselves together and hear ye, sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father." So, we'll go down to verse 5, where it goes into Simeon and Levi. It says, "Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty in their habitations." But first, let's go to the book of Genesis chapter 29 and actually see, how they acquired their names. So we'll go to the book of Genesis chapter 29 and verse 33. So we'll start right here in verse 32, but we'll start right here. It says, "For she said, Surely the Lord Yahweh hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." It says, "And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, Because the Lord Yahweh hath heard that I was hated, he hath therefore given me a son also, and she called his name Simeon." That's how you get affliction heard, And then you drop down to verse 34. It says, "And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, Now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him three sons. Therefore was his name called Levi." So that's how you get the name. So we'll go back to the book of Genesis chapter 25 and actually see, how it relates to us in the last days. So Genesis chapter 25, you got Genesis chapter 49 and verse 5, you got Simeon, which are the so-called Dominicans in these days. Let's go back to the chart. All right, you got Simeon, which are the so-called Dominicans, and you got Levi, which is the so-called Haitians this day. So let's get into this lesson. It says, "Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty are in their habitation." So we know all the 12 tribes, all the brothers of the 12 tribes are brethren, why specifically does it say Simeon and Levi? It's because they're on the same landmass, the island of Hispaniola. So let me see. I think I pulled it up. So you got Haiti on the left side, which are the so-called Haitians, and you have Dominican Republic on the right side, which are the so-called Dominicans, which are the Simeonites, and Levi are the Levites on the left side. So we see this is why I say they are specifically said they are brethren, because they're on the same landmass and it's divided down the middle. So back to verse 5, it says, instruments of cruelty are in their habitation. So, instruments of cruelty can go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 34. It goes into when their sister was defiled. They slew the Canaanites, the Hamites. So we'll go to the book of Genesis, chapter 34. It says the treachery of Jacob's son. So, this is going into the instruments of cruelty. We'll start at verse 1. We'll get verse 1 and 2. We'll jump around. It says, and Daniah, the daughter of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her and took her and lay with her and defiled her, basically, he raped her. And this is a Canaanite, a Hamite. So let's go to the NLT. It's going to get, lay it out. Verse 2, you see it says he seized her and raped her. So basically, he, is saying it right there. He raped her. So, from there, we'll drop down. Let's go to verse 22. And Salaki for being all over the place. Verse 22, it says, but they will consider staying here and becoming one people with us only if all our men are circumcised just as they are. So the Canaanites invited, the sons of Jacob, sons and daughters of Jacob, to live with them within their community, after all this took place. And Jacob was really about to agree with it. But verse 23, it says, but if we do this, all their livestock and possessions will eventually be ours. Let's agree to their terms and let them settle here among us. Says, so all the men of the town council agreed with Hamor and Shechem, and every male in the town was circumcised. So, they agreed to be circumcised to be able to, let Jacob's sons into the community as well as his daughters. They want to lay with the daughters of Jacob. They wanted to be a part of the community. They saw the benefits. Verse 25, it says, but 3 days, this point right here, it says, but 3 days later, when their wounds were still sore, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, who were Daniah's full brothers, took their swords and entered the town without opposition. Then they slaughtered every male there, including Hamor, the son of Shechem. They killed them with their swords and took Daniah from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. So they slaughtered everybody. And it goes on. We can continue reading, but, basically the whole city, town was plundered. It says, meanwhile, the rest of Jacob's sons arrived, finding the men slaughtered and plundered the town because their sisters had been defiled there. So they didn't agree with that. But this is going into the instruments of cruelty. It says, afterwards, Jacob said unto Simeon and Levi, you have ruined me. You made me stink among all the people of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. I will be ruined and my entire household will be wiped out. It says, but why should we let them treat our sister like a prostitute? They retorted angrily. So, together, they plotted to murder these Canaanites, man. So they're tightly joined together. As we see, they're on the same landmass, you know, um, specifically on the same landmass, being brothers. So let's go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 49, and we'll continue on. Oh, let's go back to the KJV, Salakia. All right, it says, this is the book of Genesis, chapter 49, in verse 5, it says, Simeon and Levi are brethren, instruments of cruelty in their habitation. Verse 6, O my soul, come thou unto their secret. And you go into the secret. Voodoo is heavily practiced amongst Levi and Simeon, the so-called Haitians and Dominicans. And we can see this. All right, it says Haiti and the Dominican Republic, despite sharing the island of Hispaniola, have distinct relationships with voodoo. Haitian voodoo is a well-established complex religion with deep roots in West African traditions. Dominican voodoo, also known as Las 21 Divisions, is a related but separate spiritual practice that has evolved with the Dominican Republic. It says, while both involve communication with spirits and deities, Dominican voodoo is generally more flexible and less strictly adhered to than Haitian voodoo. And then it goes into the origins, beliefs, practices, but basically, this is heavily practiced on the island of Hispaniola, So this is further proving, that Levi and Simeon are brothers, according to the scriptures. Let's see, it says, verse 6 again, it says, O my soul, come not thou into their secret, until their assembly mine honor. Be not thou unified, for their anger they slew a man, and that's going back to Genesis chapter 34. It says, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Verse 7, it says, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and will scatter them in Israel, So, you see Levi, Levi has all kind of communities scattered, throughout really America. South Florida has a deep Haitian community, pretty much every city in Babylon the Great, as well as, Dominicans, all over New York, they got their own community in New York. I don't really know about the West Coast, but I'm sure, they out there too, So basically, that's pretty much the lesson. But I did have one more thing, like going into the voodoo aspect of everything. You had this movie right here, came out in 1988. It's called The Serpent and the Rainbow, and it goes into the culture of Levi doing this voodoo. Says the overview, it says, in a time of social and political unrest in Haiti, anthropologist, David Allen, travels to the torn country to study a voodoo drug used in religious practices to turn victims into living zombies, and it goes on, but basically goes into the witchcraft. And if you into old movies, the 80s movies, this is a good movie to watch, man. But pretty much, that's pretty much the lesson. Lord willing, it was edifying. And let's see if you. I did look up on Chat GPT, Salakia. I put in, why do Dominicans and Haitians dislike each other? Because even though they're on the same island, they do hate each other. It's in the scriptures. Let's see. Be not united. United. Let me see. I must have looked over that. Verse 6, it says, be not thou united. So, they're on the same island, but yet and still they don't like each other. So it says Dominican Haitian tensions go back more than 2 centuries, and they're rooted in a mix of history, politics, economics, and racial culture identity. It says it's not as simple as they just don't like each other. It's a complicated relationship shaped by events that still echo today. And we know this all goes back to, the French and the Spanish, putting them against each other, really. It says, here's a condensed version of the long story. And then it goes into it. It says the island of Hispaniola was split into 2 colonies. The French control the west and the Spanish control the east, which is Dominican Republic in the east and Haiti in the west. It says the French side became wealthier due to sugar plantations worked by enslaved Africans, which we know they were Israelites, from the tribe of Levi. It says while the Spanish side was poor and less densely populated, this created early cultural differences, French versus Spanish language, Catholic traditions with different expressions, and a stronger African culture influence in Haiti. Yeah, and we know, they learned all of that, man, from West Africa, man, going off, practicing this voodoo, and they brought it over here, so, it goes on into the history. Dominicans won independence from Haiti, not Spain, and man, this all goes back to these Edomites, why they don't like each other, why they're pitted against each other, so to speak. So, Lord willing, it was edifying, and like I said, the water for the patience, man, from the elders and the brothers, you know. But Lord willing, it was edifying. We want to constantly give our praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, by Hashem, Yahweh Shai, by Hashem Rakakwadash. Shalom.